What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the lovely folks at NerdTees, and welcome to week 10 of my weekly CFL pick show for the 2018 CFL season. And after a rough go of things the week before, we bounced back hard in week 9. The do's and don'ts come through yet again. Straight up 2-1 in the 3 games last week. That has us 22-12 straight up. Against the spread, where we struck out on them completely the week before. Last week, we were perfect. 3-0 against the spread in week 9. That has us back up to 18-16 ATS. And over-under, I pushed on one of them. It was my first push of any kind this season, but I didn't get one wrong. I was 2-0 with the push. That has us 20-13-1 over-under on the season. Those numbers looking real good. Brief update now on the CFL standings. In the East Division, Ottawa still leads the way now at 5-3, outscoring opponents 25-23. Hamilton is at 3-5 in second place, still outscoring opponents, however, 26-22. Toronto 2-5, being outscored 31-20, and Montreal still down at 1-7, still looking for their second win, being outscored 33-15. In the West, Calgary still undefeated, 7-0, 29-12 is the scoring margin with the Stampeders. Winnipeg and Edmonton now both 5-3. I give the slight edge to Winnipeg just based on, the scoring margin. Outscoring opponents on average is Winnipeg 34-21. Winnipeg, the best offense right now statistically in the CFL and one of the best defenses. Edmonton outscoring opponents 28-25. And we've got Saskatchewan, who's at 3-4, and BC is also at 3-4. Both teams averaging 22 points per game. BC giving up a couple more. Saskatchewan's being outscored 25-22. BC being outscored 27-22. Back to a 4-pack of games here in Week 10. We've got Ottawa traveling to Winnipeg to take on the Blue Bombers. We've got BC traveling to Toronto to take on the Argos in a West versus East matchup. Actually, those are both West versus East matchups. We got Montreal traveling to Edmonton, another West versus East matchup, to take on the Eskimos. And the final game of the week is the Calgary Stampeders traveling to Saskatchewan to take on the Roughriders. Let's start with that first game. Ottawa traveling to Winnipeg. REDBLACKS and Blue Bombers, the battle of colors. Both of these teams are coming into this game off of a win. Ottawa coming in off the 24-17 win against Montreal last week, if that's what you want to call it. The REDBLACKS had a monstrous 601 yards of total offense in that football game against Montreal's horrific defense. But 601 yards of total offense does not overshadow the fact that they turned the ball over 6 times, took 7 penalties, which was more penalties than the Montreal Alouettes. Trevor Harris at quarterback threw for a pretty ridiculous 81% and a very ridiculous 487 yards in that game. But he only scored 1 touchdown, only threw the 1 touchdown, and he threw another pick, another interception, and this one to Montreal, the worst defense in the league. Look, here's how it goes with me with Ottawa. William Powell, Greg Ellingson, and Brad Sinopoli are all great. They're great weapons that the REDBLACKS have on the offensive side. But Trevor Harris is a chronic underperformer, and how can I say that when he's just thrown for like 900 yards in his last 2 games combined? He's an underperformer because he's not finishing. He's not scoring touchdowns. He's throwing interceptions. He's throwing as many or more interceptions as he is throwing touchdowns. With players like that, he should be a better finisher than he is. And when he underperforms in those terms, this team has issues. The issues that this team has is overshadowed by the fact that they're 5-3, overshadowed by the fact that they're leading the division. At quarterback, they have a chronic underperformer in terms of putting points on the board. Ottawa is not as good as their record indicates. Meanwhile, on the other side of the football is a team that I would argue is better than their record indicates. Winnipeg, again, 5-3 like we mentioned, also coming in off a win 29-23 over the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I feel like I haven't really been giving enough love to the defense lately. It was really linebacker Adam Bighill that was the difference in that football game for Winnipeg to pick up that win. 7 tackles, he had a sack, he had a forced fumble that Winnipeg did recover. He was the difference in what was ultimately a 1-possession win, a very close game. Matt Nichols had a bit of a rough game. He was only 54%. He did throw the 2 touchdowns, only 54%. But over the last 3 games, he has a 6-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, so he is finishing. He is putting points on the board. And everyone's sort of talking about, oh, Matt Nichols and his lackluster play. I don't know, he's thrown 6 touchdowns in 3 weeks. That doesn't really strike me as lackluster. But I mean, let's be honest, if we're talking about the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, the conversation begins and almost ends with Andrew Harris. Andrew Harris has been held under 80 total yards, and that's in the run game and in the pass game. Under 80 total yards, how many times this season? I want you to guess. I'm going to give you the do Jeopardy music. 1 time. 1 time. Under 80 total yards in a game. Blue Bombers going to be at home for this one, and riddle me this. How does the Ottawa defense, who's giving up about 350 yards against per game, which is on the lower end of the league, and a QBR against of 94.8, which is, I think, 3rd worst in the whole CFL. How does this Ottawa defense contain the combination of Matt Nichols in the pass game and Andrew Harris everywhere? Riddle me that. I think it's pretty obvious I'm going with Winnipeg in this game. I was almost disgusted by what I saw in that Ottawa-Montreal game. Ottawa should have clobbered them. And yet I took Montreal plus 14 in that game because I knew in my bones, I knew the Alouettes were going to cover that. And now I've got Winnipeg, who is a much better team, I think, than their record indicates. And this is a team that's coming in, and I'm getting, what am I getting on them? On the line, I'm getting just under a touchdown. So I'm super, super excited to hammer Winnipeg in this game. I'm going to take the Blue Bombers straight up, especially where they're in their own building. I'm going to take Winnipeg minus 6.5 on the line as well. Total in this game is set at 53.5 points. I think that's actually a pretty decent total. I do think, however, that it's going to stay under because Winnipeg's defense is really, really good, and Ottawa can play themselves some defense as well. So let's stay under 53.5 points. Let's go to Toronto now, where the Argos will welcome in the visiting BC Lions. Both of these teams also coming into this game off of victories in their last game. BC, a 31-23 win last week over the Edmonton Eskimos. Lions went on a 21-3 run in the second half of that football game, played absolute shutdown defense when they got back on the field for the second half. That propelled them to a come-from-behind win against a pretty damn good team. Now, all was not sunshine and rainbows for BC in that football game. Their offense, I thought, was actually kind of middling. It was only 279 yards of total offense in the entire game in all phases for the BC Lions. That number doesn't exactly jump off the page. I mean, there's a lot of quarterbacks in this league that put that up just in the pass game. What they did was they made the most of their opportunities and they scored points in all phases. They scored points in the pass game, a pass touchdown. They scored with a rush touchdown. They scored with a return touchdown. Chris Rainey with an excellent, I think it was a kick return? No, it was a punt return. I can't remember. It was a return touchdown for Chris Rainey, and it was an excellent play. I just can't remember exactly which one it was. And they scored on field goals. Also of note, running back Trayvon Van gets his first carries of the season, just so happens to score his first touchdown of the season in relief of Jeremiah Johnson, who was put on the one-game injured list. I expect that he'll be back this week as the starting running back. Trayvon Van's usually the second stringer. Look at the Argos. Argos did not play last week, but they are coming in off of that 42-41 come-from-behind victory over the REDBLACKS in Week 8. Speaking of second half runs, Toronto went on quite a run in their game as well. 35-13 run in the second half. McLeod Bethel-Thompson, 3 touchdown passes in the fourth quarter to complete the comeback, a game that Ottawa never should have lost, but Toronto earned the win. Of course, they had to do it the hard way. Toronto had to generate over 30% of the total points that they have scored this season. They scored 137 points. Well, 42 of them came in this game. It was over 30% of their total season points they had to generate in just one game. But I also say that to say, don't expect offensive fireworks in this football game between Toronto and BC. Neither of them are great offense. BC's has been better. Speaking of Travis Lulay, he will find some resistance in the Argos secondary. The Argos are actually quite adept at knocking down passes. They sit 4th in the CFL right now with 20 pass knockdowns. Part of that is a lot of teams feel confident that they can throw on Toronto because their defense is not very good. But they do have the 20 pass knockdowns, so they are getting it done in that area. What they're not really doing is generating that into quarterback pressure or interceptions. They only have 7 sacks on the season, and they've only had 4 interceptions. That is worst in the CFL, I believe, in both categories. So they're not really generating a lot of pressure on the quarterback, and they're not forcing the quarterback to make mistakes that they turn into turnovers. But speaking of having active secondaries, the BC Lions have a pretty active one of their own. They're actually ahead of Toronto in terms of pass knockdowns. They have 25, and they have double the number of interceptions. They have 8 to Toronto's 4. So that hyperactive secondary, I get the feeling, is going to make McLeod Bethel Thompson's life pretty damn annoying in this football game. So I'm really leaning pretty heavily on the BC Lions here. I'm going to take BC straight up in Toronto to beat Toronto. On the line, the Argos are 2.5-point dogs at home. Total in this game is set at 50.5. Now, since I like BC to win, 2.5 points is under a field goal. I feel pretty confident taking that. So let's hammer BC in this one. BC straight up, as well as BC minus 2.5. That 50.5 points is another pretty good total. I think Vegas is getting better on setting their totals. I do still think that this stays under because it's two offenses that have kind of struggled to put up points. Sure, Toronto's defense is terrible. Their scoring defense is terrible. I could see this being like a 24-20, something like that. So I think it's still fairly comfortable. I'm going to stick with the under here, even though that's a pretty decent number. We're going to stay under 50.5 points. We've reached the point in the show where I take that moment to plug my lovely friends at NerdTees. NerdTees.ca, promo code BWFinest. Going to save you 15% at checkout. Free shipping in Canada on any order over $50. If you're in the US, excellent conversion rate on the US dollar. Today's blend is the lemon ginger, and the reason that I'm drinking the lemon ginger specifically today is I just talked for an hour and a half yesterday about NFC predictions for the NFL. I hope you've watched the video. So the old throat needs a little soothing. It's lovely, soothing, and delicious. Nerdtees.ca. Find yourself something to love and use that promo code BWFinest. Save a little money on the way. Let's go to Edmonton now, where the Montreal Alouettes are going to be in town in Week 10. Both of these teams coming into this game off of losses. We'll start with Montreal. That 17-24 loss to Ottawa, if you really want to call it a loss. Overall, I think the Alouettes can be very encouraged by their effort. They didn't take a lot of penalties. They were leading that game for a large portion of it, or like leading or tied. Ottawa realistically probably should have blown them out, and Ottawa didn't blow them out. So Montreal can take a ton of confidence out of that football game. And speaking of moral victories, hey, Johnny Manziel. Johnny Manziel improved significantly from his first game to his second game starting in the CFL. Manziel goes from 55% in his first game to 61%. That's plus 6%. Nobody's going to argue with that. From 104 yards to 168 yards. That's a 64-yard difference. Nobody's going to argue with that. And the one that everyone is going to be in love with went from 4 interceptions to none. 6.9 yards per carry for Montreal, but they only carried the ball 15 times. 5.2 yards per carry for Ottawa. They carried it more. They had more yardage. But Montreal had the better yards per carry. Commit to the damn run game more. How many more games have to go by where your yards per carry is significantly better than the team you're playing or the team you're about to play? How many more games need to go by before you realize, maybe we ought to commit to this run game that we're actually beating teams at? Like we mentioned with the Eskimos, they're also coming into this game off of a loss, that 31-23 loss to BC. Probably a game that they should have won, but at the same time, BC got it done with that defense. The Eskimos only scored 3 points in the second half of that game, but it's not just about the points scored on the board. In the third quarter, how many first downs do you think the Edmonton Eskimos had in the entire 15-minute third quarter? 0 first downs in an entire quarter? That's either great shutdown defense or your offense was just... And if your offense was, then that's inexcusable. But I'll tell you what's more inexcusable than that, and probably a reason why the offense sputtered so much in the second half. 14 penalties? 14 penalties. 14 is an inexcusable amount of penalties to take if you're a good football team playing against a team that historically plays you very close. And that's what we said about them last week. BC and Edmonton historically play each other very close. That's why I hedged my bets and took BC plus 3.5 on the line, because they play each other close. And you take 14 penalties and you still have an expectation to win that game, I got news for you. And when the offense went away, unfortunately, the defense did not come to play. The defense couldn't get any stops. They couldn't get the stops that they needed. BC generated points on all but 2 of their second half possessions. So Edmonton, with a lead in that football game, could not keep points off the board, stall drives, get the ball back for their offense so that maybe the offense could get into a little bit more of a groove. I think everything in this game lines up for an Eskimos bounce back. They have to be really upset with how they gave that game away against BC and how they could not prevent it from happening. So look, they're at home. I think everything here sets up for an Eskimos win, but this is also why they play the football games rather than just do them out on paper. Beware the trap game. This is going to be Manziel's third start now. He looked more comfortable. He's gotten better. Maybe Montreal decides to finally commit to the run game. I'd be surprised, but maybe they do. Even though this probably does have trap game written all over it, I still feel confident about Edmonton bouncing back and winning this game in pretty big fashion, where I didn't have confidence in Ottawa covering their spread against Montreal last week. I feel more than confident that Edmonton is capable of covering their spread in this game this week, which is 16.5 points at home. Maybe if the game was in Montreal, I might be like, ooh, they're probably going to cover plus 16.5. But it's in Edmonton. I'm going to take Edmonton and I'm going to hammer Edmonton. So Edmonton straight up to beat Montreal. I like Edmonton to cover the minus 16.5, although that one's wonky and I don't like double-digit spreads as it is. The total in the game is set at 52.5. I have to think the total goes over because I don't think Montreal's defense has anything for Mike Riley and Edmonton. So let's go over 52.5 points in a game that Edmonton covers. And the last game we're going to look at this week takes us to Saskatchewan. We got the Stampeders traveling to Saskatchewan to take on the Roughriders. Calgary coming into this game off of, obviously, their 7th win of the season. They have not lost yet. That was a 27-18 win over BC. That was back in week 8. The Stampeders weathered a stagnant third quarter where they only scored, I believe, 1 point in the third quarter. That was after taking a 17-3 lead into the half and just kept BC at arm's length basically the entire game. Really did not give them an opportunity to get back into that football game, even with the third quarter going the way that it did. Bo Levi Mitchell has played pretty damn smart football pretty well all season. He's throwing for 66%, 3.25 to 1 touchdown to interception ratio. So he's completing, he's protecting the football, he's playing smart football, but he cannot get sloppy in what is probably going to be a pretty pass-happy matchup. They lead the CFL in the number of sacks allowed. They've only allowed 9 so far this season. They also lead the CFL in fewest turnovers with 12. What that means is for an opposing defense, your opportunities come at a premium. Calgary does not give you very many. When they present one, you have to take advantage of it. Under no circumstances can you leave defensive opportunities on the table because Calgary's not going to give you very many more. For Saskatchewan, they come into this football game off of a 26-19 loss against the Edmonton Eskimos. That was back in week 8 as well. So both of these teams should be fairly well rested coming in off of the bye. Zach Collaros returned in that game, had himself a pretty decent game, but Saskatchewan never really felt threatening. I know that's weird to say about a game that was only decided by 7 points, but really, at no point in that football game did I feel like Saskatchewan was going to win. As I mentioned, Collaros, good effort in his return, 261 yards. I believe also found the end zone at least once. So Collaros returning and playing fairly well is pretty damn good news for what is an anemic pass offense in Saskatchewan. And honestly, it's probably a boon to their run game too, because you're looking at a run offense that's got the 4th most rush yards in the CFL. That's good. But they've only generated that into 3 rushing touchdowns all season. And this is what I talk about. Finish. It's great. You can have all the yards in the world. It's the Trevor Harris equation. You can have all the yards in the world, but if you don't finish, if it's not leading to touchdowns, what have you got? You got a pretty looking stat line, and it's tough to win. We also talked a lot about pass knockdowns in this episode. This is, I think, the 3rd time we're going to look at it. Saskatchewan does a very good job knocking down passes. They're 3rd in the CFL in this category with 21. However, they do not translate those pass knockdowns. They have 21. They don't translate them into interceptions. They only have 5. The only team that has fewer is Toronto, who we talked about earlier in the episode. And I think interceptions are the kinds of thing that you're going to need against a team like Calgary. You need to capitalize and make the most of any opportunity that Bo Levi Mitchell might give you in the pass game. When I did my deep dive into this game, I came up with a fairly simplified formula. Win the line, win the game. You have 2 teams here in Calgary and Saskatchewan that have been pretty good this season at getting to the quarterback defensively. Calgary's got 17 sacks, Saskatchewan's got 16. There are also 2 football teams that have been very good at preventing the other team from getting to their quarterback. We mentioned Calgary leads the CFL. They've only allowed 9 sacks. Saskatchewan's only allowed 10. So as far as I'm concerned, the team that does the best job of pressuring the other team's quarterback into potentially making a mistake or two is the team that's going to win the game. Quite frankly, I do feel like that's going to be the Calgary Stampeders. I think Calgary, top to bottom, is just too good of a team. And Saskatchewan, as much as I pumped their tires early in the season, there's stuff going on there. So I'm going to take Calgary, even though the game is in Saski. I'm going to take Calgary to win that game. And for the 4th time in a row, I'm actually going to hammer Calgary. Calgary straight up. And I like Calgary to cover the 7 points that they're favored by. Saski, 7-point dog at home. Really, like earlier in the season, I would have hammered Saski plus 7 for sure. Might have even taken them straight up to win. Until somebody proves that they can beat Calgary, I think you got to take this where it's only a touchdown. Total in the game is set at 48 points. It's the lowest total of the week. I'm still going to go under on it because it's 2 defenses that can play very well, and Calgary is not in the market of blowing teams out. They're in the market of, we're going to do enough to win, we're going to let our defense win the game for us. And that's been their formula all damn season. They're only allowing, 12 points a game? I think the game stays, it's not going to be a ton under, but I think it stays under the 48. All right, folks, those are the picks for Week 10 in the CFL. Let's go over them here with you one more time. I like Winnipeg at home to beat Ottawa. I like Winnipeg to cover minus 6.5 points in that game, a game that stays under the 53.5 point total. I like BC on the road to go into Toronto and beat the Argos. I like BC minus 2.5 on the line in a game that also stays under a 50.5 point total. I like Edmonton at home to beat the Alouettes, and I'm going to take Edmonton to cover the minus 16.5, although I feel a little wonky about that one. The only game that goes over this week, I've got that one going over the 52.5 point total. And I like Calgary on the road in Saskatchewan to beat the Roughriders. Going to take Calgary to cover minus 7 against the spread in a game that stays under 48 points. That's going to do it for Week 10 in the CFL, folks. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the lovely folks at NerdTees, not Starbucks Shanghai, but NerdTees. Nerdtees.ca, promo code BWFinest. Save yourself some money there. Enjoy the games in Week 10. We're now pretty well at the halfway point of the CFL regular season, who has been a surprise to you? Toss that in the comment section below. What team's been the most surprising? What team's been the least surprising? Who are you the most excited about? Who are you disappointed about? All things CFL, toss them in the comment section below. Let's take a look at them. Let's get a conversation going. We'll see you again for week 11.